Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
The pandemic has been like the multi-headed Hydra of Greek mythology. We've been so busy slaying it, we haven't had time to plan for the future. Well, now it's time. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. If anything, the last 2 years of COVID has highlighted how adaptable and creative we can be in business. The problem, though, is we've been more reluctant or unable to plan for the future, and that's not good for long-term business health. These observations are from strategist and facilitator Rosie Yeo, author of Go for Bold: How to Create Powerful Strategy in Uncertain Times. Now's the time for business owners to shift their thinking from short-term to long-term. Rosie explains to Chris Ashmore.
We have to start by recognising how important it is to look at the long term, because at its core, strategy is a plan to achieve long-term competitive advantage. So it doesn't happen overnight. And it's hard to set ambitions if you're only focused on the now. I mean, I could tell you today that my ambition was to run a marathon next week, but it's not actually credible and I'm nowhere able to achieve that. Whereas if I could sit here and say, Chris, in 2 years' time, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon, that's an ambition that could be achievable. I just need to map out the plan and the training to get there. So I think we need to actually allow ourselves to take the time to think again and allow ourselves to look further, look up, if you like, and wonder what's possible, and just take that time to think about what the future could be. If people are feeling absolutely paralysed by uncertainty right now, you can still do a little bit of strategic thinking. So think about your best case and your worst case scenario long term. Map out what the keys to success are for both of those scenarios, and then decide to work on the ones that are common to both. So no matter what happens externally, you've still got a sense of what you can do now to set yourself up for long-term success.
Well, I suppose any strategy is better than no strategy. Or is that the case? Can you have a bad strategy?
Do you know what, Chris? I think in one sense, you can have a bad strategy. Sometimes you can have a good strategy that's not fit for purpose when circumstances change as well. Sometimes we think we've got a strategy, but it's not actually clear what it is and what the point of difference is. I don't know, do you remember the hardware store wars about 10 years ago? At the time, you had Bunnings was building its empire of big box hardware retailers, and Woolworths decided they were going to get in on it too. So they set up their own large chain, Masters. And of course, in the process, thousands of independent hardware stores just couldn't compete with the pricing and the range offered by the big guys. But unfortunately for Masters couldn't compete with another big competitor either because there wasn't enough to differentiate it. So Woolworths actually ended up pulling out of that whole system, selling off the stores, losing hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. So, it's hard to get the right strategy. But I also think sometimes we need to think about what you incorporate in that strategy. So a really great strategy, at its heart, there's a good idea. So there's a great idea for how you're going to be different or how you're going to give something that people love or do it better. Then you need a clear pathway for how to implement that great idea. And the third key element is that it has to be a shared story. People around you, your organisation, they need to understand and commit to the big idea and the path forward too.
So how do you come up with a good idea?
Often when we start thinking about, okay, let's do a strategy session, everybody focuses on the data and the information they need to pull together. We need to know our sales figures. We need to know who the competitors are. We need to know what the forecasts are. And that's absolutely right. But the future hasn't actually occurred yet. So we actually have to imagine what's possible. Just knowing what we know right now is not enough when you're actually trying to set a powerful strategy for the future. So I often say that information needs to be blended with imagination. Just asking that question, what if we did things differently? What if we were starting this business all over again? How would it look different? What if we changed the way we offered our product, or the shape of our product even, or the size. All these what ifs are part of the creative thinking that goes into developing a powerful strategy.
And then the next is clarity. You've got to be clear on exactly what it is that you're offering.
That's true. And I think even more than that, when you're having your discussions about strategy or you're thinking about your strategy yourself, you need to be clear about a few things. You need to be clear about your ultimate purpose. So what is it you actually long-term want to achieve? Why are you here? Why is your business here or your organization? And then, especially when you're talking with a group of people, you need to be clear about the choices you're making. Because for every great idea and every pathway you want to go down, there's probably another one that you're saying no to. And you have to be really clear about what those choices are that you're making and what that means. And I also remind people that you've got to always ask yourself what matters most. We can't do everything. So we need to choose. I don't know about you, but every time you do a strategy session, it's so good to write down a whole lot of dot points. You know, people love a flip chart and heaps of dot points and great ideas. Fantastic. But I've never found any organization that can do everything they decide is a good idea. So having that clarity about what is going to get you further and faster down towards your ambition, that's what matters most.
And then the third key, you need to get everybody on board. And that's not easy to do.
No, it's absolutely not. Consensus is so important because if you don't have that shared ambition, you know, people will walk away from the room having nodded their heads and said, yep, we're definitely going to do that. And they don't. Sometimes they don't even understand what it is you've decided, or they just don't agree to it. So there's a go slow that happens. But it's interesting too. I think sometimes we don't always think about what we mean by consensus, because you get any 10 people in a room any day and they're not going to all agree on every single item as their 10 out of 10 best choice. So often it's important to agree first up, what do we mean by consensus? I mean, I often use a definition with clients that I can work with this and I can support this. So for whatever decision it might be, I may not think that this decision is my 10 out of 10 best choice, but I understand how the group has got to that point, and I'm willing to go back to my team, to the other stakeholders, and explain why this is a good idea and the right decision to move forward with. And I'm willing to actually take that action to move it forward. So that's the definition I often use.
On a practical level, how do you get all this into practice within the business?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to take the time to actually have these conversations. Often I think, particularly when people are so busy, focused on the now and all the stuff that has to get done, people talk about it taking the luxury to think about long-term strategy. I see it as a necessity. You know, it's one of the most important things to put in your schedule. I also suggest to people that if you don't automatically have a team around you that needs to be part of those strategy discussions, it's really valuable to have the conversation with someone. If you don't have a business partner, it could be your partner in life. It could be a really trusted supplier or partner down the track, or just a mate who's also dealing with their own businesses and their own challenges. But talking it out loud and talking through what your strategy is and how you're going to achieve it is just so important. And the other thing I often recommend, Chris, is don't try and use a really complex framework when you're working through a strategy. You know, focus on the quality of the conversations you use and make sure the framework you use is really simple so that everybody's asking those big questions together. What if? What about? What matters most? And if anybody does need some handy sort of planning templates, I'm really happy if they go to my website, rosieyeo.com.au/resources, and there's a couple of free resources there for some simple planning templates that people can use when they're trying to plan their own strategy.
That was strategist and facilitator Rosie Yeo. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schilberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.